So I want to go back and do some more cookies because you can never have enough cookies. And of course, I'm referring to the delicious cookies, which these are not. So let's continue looking at it. Let's get idle open. And I want to open up. I don't remember if it's the version we finished with, but it's similar. Let's see, open. So we did two versions of cookies. First version of cookies, remember first version of cookies, which had a dictionary of dictionaries. So the first one had one item, with UCSD.edu had one item, password. And then the second one, remember the site, this one had two cookies. Each one of these is a cookie. So this total has 3 cookies, one at UCSD.edu, and then 2 cookies for Python News. So dictionaries of dictionaries. And we finished up, we actually only had this line last time, where we returned the list of cookies. We didn't do any error correction. But now we're basically have just this one thing, which isn't any different than checking to see if the site exists in the cookies. And if it's not in the cookies, meaning that site's not there, we just return the empty list. So this is basically what we finished up here. We can actually do get cookies name from site, and we get a list back. And if we run this, we type cookies, and we call this method, and we look for, give me all the cookies for you, give me all the cookies in this dictionary for UCSD.edu. Or we could say, give me all the cookies for pythonnews.com, and we get all the cookies printed out. Okay, great, that works. Now I want to go through the example though, of maybe you didn't understand how this keys things works, or maybe you don't remember how to do keys here. And let's rewrite this method without using keys. And kind of we're going to talk about it, and then we ran out of time. Not only did we run out of time, we went way over. So let's rewrite this, but I don't want to use this part here. So I'm going to delete that for now. And if you think about how to write this, and you don't know anything about keys, but you do know enough about dictionaries, like, hey, we could loop through the dictionary. So let's just loop through the dictionary and save all the cookies. So we have an empty list. We're just going to build. So for website in cookies, we're just going to build on that, right? For all the sites in cookies. Remember, that's going to give us the sites. So ucsd.edu, pythonnews.com. That's going to give us the sites, or also called websites. And then we'll just loop through all the cookie names, call that cookie names, in that particular site, right? So this is literally like the same code that we just wrote almost. And then we're just going to append it. So we're just going to append it to the names of the list of names. And then we can just return the list of names. So we're just going to loop through and just kind of go through everything. And this is just the first version. It may or may not work, but let's give it a shot. I actually have a problem with CNAMES, so I called it CNAMES. Yep, has to be CNAMES, thank you. Let's try it again. But notice that I'm getting all the cookies. So remember, this is just the first version, but it's not actually giving me the cookies for the specific site I'm asking for. So instead of just looping through and dumping everything directly in, why don't we put a check? If website equals site, only then do we append it. If it's the site we're looking for, only then do we need to append it. So now we get the cookies for that specific site. Of course, do we really need this now? Let's actually do a version of this, but let's call it bio.ucsd.edu. There's our empty list, right? If it's not there, we expect it to return nothing. And if we remove these two lines, it should still work for UCSD, still work for Python News. And it doesn't crash this time. It's because it's going through the loop and it's not actually trying to access the site in here. If we don't get a match, we don't ever access this indirectly. So we don't actually need that check like we did previously because it's already happening inside of the loop. So that's one way to do that, right? And it works fairly well. And if you don't know anything about keys, that's how you would write it. Remember, we had two versions. And we didn't write it for the second version at all. And let me just steal. I don't even know which one of these is going to work or not. I don't think either of them will actually work. Remember, the data is different here for this other implementation. Remember that this implementation, version 2, is not a dictionary of dictionaries. In fact, version 2 is a dictionary with tuples as keys and then just a regular value. So we have a tuple and a value, tuple and a value. So let's kind of figure out how to write this. Before we figure out how to write this, let's actually look and see what our data really looks like. So let's just print out, we'll just loop through the cookies and just print them all out. It really doesn't matter what we pass in here, it's just going to print them all out. And we can see we're getting a tuple directly as our key. So we're printing out the key and we're just getting a tuple. So that kind of tells us something there. Well, let's actually go put the names back in here. We're going to build a list of names. We're going to not print out the keys this time, but how do we check for site? How do we check that we have the right key? Well, remember a tuple. In fact, let's go back and look at a tuple. We have these tuples. And if I do Z0, I get site. And if I do Z1, I actually get the cookie name. So if I do an if statement on 0 and I compare that to site, I'm checking to see if we have the correct site. Based on our previous one, that's this check right there. And now that I have that, anything that passes, I just need to add the cookie name directly into names. So last time we did names out append. And where's my cookie name? My cookie name is at bracket 1 of the tuple in the key. It's directly in the tuple, remember? There's the site at Z0, and then Z1 of the tuple had the cookie name. And so we just add that to our list and return our list. Run it. Let's see, let's do Python News. font preference session, UCSD password, bio UCSD empty. So 2 different versions giving us the same answer. And they look very similar. The only difference is we have to do 2 loops here, one for the site and then one for the cookies. And here we have 1 loop because the cookie name is already in the key. And let me get rid of that. And because we changed the implementation, right? Remember, we changed the implementation up here of our dictionaries. And so we changed the implementation of our function. We changed how internally it works. But from the user perspective, I use the same method and parameters or same method and arguments exactly the same way. So the function looks the same for both versions. All the functions look the same for both versions. There's no difference between the parameter lists and the names. And so when we create a library, we have the freedom to change how the library implements everything. But the users of our library, other programmers, they don't need to understand how the implementation works. They don't need to know what the cookies library looks like. They're not going to make it. They're just going to use set cookie, and get cookie names for sites. And the data will just change on its own based on how we implement it. They just need to know how to use the library. They just need to know how what the functions do. What arguments do they need to pass in? What values are being returned? And usually that's just good documentation telling them that. And so why was it important for us to show you 2 different ways of doing these methods? Well, computer science majors are the ones who implement libraries like this for other people to use. A lot of other companies out there, they build libraries. And then there's nonprofits and open source software where it's usually computer science majors who add to them and build libraries for others to use. And then other majors like data science majors or cog-sci majors who do write programs, they'll actually use libraries that other programmers have created to create applications based on those libraries. And that's not to say that they don't write their own libraries, but usually it's the CSE majors who actually write it. And so it's important in CSE classes to understand how you could write your own libraries, because you'll find at some point in your life that you probably want to do that.